rejoining University of Liberia and going on to serve as the Vice President of Academic Affairs from 2017 to 2019. Alan is Professor of History and Executive Director of the University of Liberia's Center for Diaspora and Migration Studies. He's published a wide range of scholarly publications in journals on Liberia, the Atlantic world, and a variety of social, cultural, and political matters, and we're delighted to welcome him today for what is sure to be a great keynote address. So Dr. Alan, please come in.
I say thank you to Professor Santa for introducing me. I appreciate that. And thank you to everybody for being here this morning to listen to my presentation. Let me begin by letting you know that the topic my topic is adopting American people's way. American people was one of several ways how indigenous people refer to the settlers who arrived here. Because American people, meaning American people, segregated that. And sometimes they even call them white people, so white people. So I took what I thought was the most common name for experience, which is American people's way. That's the kind of presentation. This is the outline which I'll be following. So, what I want to show here is that my topic assimilation, we are examining assimilation. This topic here is interrelated to the topic of this conference, the afterlife of slavery in the transatlantic world. Because the foundation of Liberia, the founding of Liberia, follows exactly colonization and was established by the settlers here did bring Christianity, and they did try to Christianize the indigenous people as part of the assimilation policy. As part of the assimilation policy, and they were also involved in the process that indigenous people can influence these settlers who were also westernizing them. That was the idea, and that's the idea I'm trying to that this larger project I'm working on is trying to address. Was it unidirectional or was it bi-directional? Okay, I have a quotation here, and this
1846. And there was a young boy on the post called Daniel Baker. This name was given him by his guardian in honor of Reverend Samuel Baker, so well honored, known and honored in the United States. Daniel proved to be a bright boy. He soon learned to speak English, was sent to a from the slave ship and was to Liberia. His first name, Conley, was westernized to Conley. At the age of I have a third quotation here. Customs in Liberia at the time, where the farmers married an educated lady to maintain its prestige with the civilized community in the settlement. He could likewise have as many native or farm wives as he might find financially possible. Some farmers had 2 to 3 such wives. The memoirs of Liberian Ambassador George P. Suggest collaborated and familiar with it. Because in the 60s and the 70s, it was not unusual for what Industrial Capital is saying. And that many of the commercial farmers in those days, in the 60s and 50s, they were merely descendants of the settlers. They have rubber plantations, they have rubber farms, cocoa farms, and so forth. So what Capital was explaining, I know about it growing up, I know families who came from this situation. I was just surprised to read it in print. I didn't know it would be in print. I was just surprised to read it in print. The third point here is Dumbo. It's the Dumbo non-Christianity in singular meaning. It's a very excellent beach. It, as I will show here, that there's instances where there were cultural adaptation by the settlers. There were instances here where they were able to also be influenced by those who they are trying to assimilate. I'm beginning by first saying that I want to look at Liberia, and this is where I'm tying it to our theme, the afterlives of slavery. The founders of Liberia were originally Americans born in the United States. And they are saying, and others that we have been talking about, the free blacks who say, for example, settled in what is now serving the Afro-Brazilians, for example, who left Brazil. Some of them left in the late 1800s. They have been accused of being involved in rebellion, and they were deported, left voluntarily in the 19th century. Those groups, including the settlers who came here, I see them as a product of the transatlantic slave trade. So my thing here today ties directly into what we're trying to do here. The afterlives of the settlers is indeed the transatlantic world. So just briefly about the transatlantic world. The transatlantic degree of probability that they were influenced significantly by the indigenous people. And that's my working theory. And because the change in the environment, the environmental issues like they encounter with what they call breeding soil diseases, for example, what the experts call breeding soil disease, meaning that a population is encountering a disease for the first time, or probably the very first time. And as a consequence, the result of that disease on them will be epidemic. It's the first time. So look at what the agent, Jehovah Ashman, he wrote a book a pamphlet of farmers in Liberia. And in that pamphlet, one of the first things he mentioned was here in Liberia, and all the settlers, this 1825, about 3 years after the settlers have disembarked here. Here you can find neither winter, spring, summer, nor autumn. You must learn an entire different way of farming. Faces the colonial period, the period when we have agents running the situation here, or colony here, is a colonial period. Then in the 1830s, they went from the colonial period to the Commonwealth period. This was when all the colonies along the coast, they were mainly along the coast, they became one political unit and they had a white governor here called Thomas Buchanan. When Buchanan died here, he was succeeded by Joseph Ramos. Ramos was later on going to become president of Liberia. So Buchanan is saying there is no reason to expect that agriculture will thrive in Liberia without working animals than in Iowa or Michigan. And if the settlers, where the land and plant is by manual labor. So the absence of animal traction here was a serious setback. When you look at the archives, the settlers tried to bring animals here, try to bring large stock. Some of them did not survive because the animal sleeping sickness, a disease upon agriculture. But I was to find out that it did succeed in farming. So my question, going back to that simulation, was, how did they do that? If they were the ones who were doing the civilizing, and they learned nothing from the indigenous people because the indigenous people were savages. This is what I discovered, that in the second half of the 19th century, the settlers along the St. Paul River, Virginia, Millsburg, Clay they succeeded in exporting coffee and sugar, not just to their neighbors along the coast, like certainly the Gold Coast. They exported the sugar to the United States. They export coffee to the United States. And this is important because as part of that colonization, when they send them back to Africa, the hope was that they would become commercial farmers. They would produce here with free labor what they produce in the States on enslaved labor. So this is significant. And this certificate, I was able to pick it up thanks to they want to buy some Liberian coffee, the only thing that the coffee is being sold downstairs. This is Liberian coffee. Models, because it says U.S. Centennial Diploma Awards to SOS models for superior coffee. Liberia coffee, our cultivation, roasted daily and delivered to any express company or radio station. All in 1 pound airtight bag. But look at the top. It says Liberian coffee, St. Paul River near Monrovia. Edward Morris was an American. Not sure after it ends in September, but it looks like it fluctuates. So the farmers, as the camera has said, must cut their bushes, make sure that they burn it dry, brush, and then they sow the rice during the rain. Because once the rain is over, you can do no more farming. Unlike in the States where some farming can be done maybe for about 9 months. Because farming in the States is not based upon seasonality, it's based upon the temperature. So, there were several books I read that helped me to understand. Because the question is, when settlers leave their home, they would tend to want home food, the food that they are accustomed to. They want that home food. So I began to look in the archives to find out when the settlers came to Liberia, they did also continue to want home food. And Jessica Harris, in her book, High on the Horn, explained that not with Jessica Harris, Genovese, Eugene Genovese, John Plassig, they also explained that pork, pig, if cotton, one of them said cotton was king in the south, then pig was queen. Because every dish was pig. And what happened on the plantation is that when the pig was slaughtered, the enslaved people tended to get the ovum, the bone, the feet, the head, the entrees, and they creatively prepared some cuisine, and that became the soul, it became the basis of soul food. Even after slavery, pork remained the center to the soul food. So, based upon what I read from Jessica Harris, Eugene University, Plassig, and others, I want to see what things the settlers had, the would-be settlers had in their transatlantic packages, what came with them. And I found that it's likely that pork and collard greens was used because during slavery, the enslaved tended to give a small plot of land to the enslaved people. And sometimes it was done so that it would supplement their diet by growing crops. But also it was going to cut down on the breeding, the expenses of the enslavement. Because it means that they will work all day from 7 to about 6 or 7. They will come home and then plant their garden. They used to call it slave garden, which is, but they won't call it slave garden anymore. So from that garden, they would get their collard greens, their beans, and so forth. And that's how they would prepare their food. So on the trip here, George Brown is a Reverend, and he wrote, this was in 1849. I think he came in 1839, and the book was published in 1849. And then he said, the big waves tumble on over deck. So many of our pigs, chicken and ducks, as well as not swept overboard, were drowned. And you look at Wallace's book, Slaves No More, Letters from Liberia, 1833 to 69. The letters they are writing to their former enslavers. We is raising horse. Well, we can't question their verbs because during slavery, And then they will write, please send 1 barrel of good pork. So, I grew up in an area, I lived in the settlement, one of the settlements. And in the settlement, founded by 3 Black Americans who came here, it was not unusual for them to raise hogs. And they did the raise hogs, and that's why their parents have been doing the raising hogs. But again, I'm not sure whether prior to the 19th century, whether there were hogs in Liberia. I know there are several accounts by travelers, by European travelers, where they say they killed bush hog, and we had bush hog. But domestic pigs, I'm not sure. They may have been here before. And there's a very good likelihood that they were here, probably they were not here. But raising hogs in the settlement, in Princeton, for example, but they were not there's an ongoing discussion that the scene of Liberia does not represent all Liberians. There's several presidents, including former oil palm tree. And palm oil was exported, was part of the export to Europe in the industrial period. It was being used as lubricant for industrial machines and other things. Palm oil was being exported. When the settlers arrived, they continued to export palm oil. But the palm oil, it was never cultivated. It was sterile palm oil. So the indigenous people were going to the interior, climb the tree, the oil palm tree, and then cut the bunch, prepare it. In fact, I have a quotation in mind. The project I'm working on is the project where one of the prominent settlers said, palm oil is not cultivated as a major source of income. When the Liberian economy was teetering on the brink of insolvency, palm oil was a mainstay of the economy. Palm oil. So, palm oil, its representation on the scene was indeed deliberate, it was purposeful, because they realized that its economic importance, economic and social importance, not only to the indigenous people, but also to Liberia. Let me just of all the books that I read that led me to question, and I'm questioning this notion of assimilation. Of all the books I read, one that influenced me the most was a book by David Bosworth and others. There are 4 authors. Colonization in the Americas. In the Bosworth and others' book, they note that even in the United States, In fact, Genovese has mentioned that, Genovese spoke about this, but it mentioned that the indigenous people in the United States did influence the British settlers or colonists. They say the American fear back home. It's not a British idea, it was not a colonial package from Europe. They came from adopting what Native Americans did. They made back home. And he became several others. The point that Bosworth and colleagues were making in this book is that the environmental factor tends to be very important in the situation. If the home food doesn't grow in the colony, then you have to find alternatives. In Liberia, for example, wheat did not do well. Wheat did not do well. I read some of the letters where they said, we don't have wheat to make bread, but to make bread, we use taro, or edo to call it. So we peel the edo dry and pound it in mortar, and we use the edo to make bread. So those adjustments were made. So Bosworth's book is a good example of that. Polygyny, and I mentioned pattern, and as I said earlier, I didn't know I would see this in Princeton because for some reason I thought that this was quite commonplace during my time growing up. Dopo is perhaps an anglicized or westernized version of what those who invented this cuisine, the indigenous Bassa people, that's what I'm told. Now this word is probably Dopo. I'm pronouncing it well. Is there a Bassa person in the house? Who speaks Bassa? You Bassa? Oh. But I learned that it's from Doboy. The word is Doboy. So Doboy, Do means mortar. The mortar. Boy is the cassava. If you remember, in my opening remarks on the first day, I said that those who praise Columbus, they say, where will Liberians be? Liberians, Ghanaians, East Africans without cassava. Where will Liberians be without gumbo? And I said, for them, the arrival of the foods from the Americans was a little bit. So, dog, boy, cassava, pounded in the mortar. This is where the term comes from. And those who, this remark was made by a group in 1870. That group included a first lady of Liberia, the wife of President Edward James Ross. It included a former first lady, the wife of President Benson. They were the ones who ate this dog. In Virginia, there was a Virginia in Liberia, in Virginia, and they were describing it. So, sometimes when you look at cultural issues, you find the intersection most closely. So I thought that by looking at the cultural issues, we will find areas where there were collaboration between indigenous people, where there was contention, obviously, but there was collaboration, and we look closely, we'll find it. So my motivation here for my project is to find more areas, continue looking, and I think I anticipate that assimilation was not a one-way process. That is very likely that settlers who came with supposedly advanced culture, but also the influence. The Indian Congo, the first lady was second first lady 1870. Our history tells us that at that point, that there was a society starkly divided. Country people, indigenous people. But I think there was some collaboration, and assimilation will help to show that. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Allen, for that really generative paper. We do have time for questions, so we've got at least 10 minutes or so. Yes, sir. Do we pass the mic?
Yeah.
Pass this mic, or?
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Ali. Your presentation was very, very brilliant. But then from that presentation, most especially the last part, it gave me different understanding that the afterlife of slavery, we are being affected as Liberians for the fact that the history didn't do well in the slavery, didn't do well, they affected our culture. Because if you are telling us that don't go now, is don't go. I mean, we are being affected greatly. Because those things should have been written the way they should have been. So anyone who will come across the history will know that yes, indeed, that brown culture stay alive. This is my first time to avoid that. Then you say, don't go. Now you it, don't go. Yes. So that alone, I think we need to go back and do more of our history than what we are doing. Thank you very much.
Pronunciation may not be correct, but that information I got it from 87 from It said that this is the indigenous class of people's food. They come from the word God, which means immortal. That's That's why I want to know that. And then Pastor President in the House to confront that. Yes. Pastor Reed? Oh. Okay. It's right. It's right. It's right. Yeah. So dog. No. Yeah. So the heat is yeah, the issue of it being yeah, I agree. Go ahead. I agree that we should know their history. But let's not forget that the same Israel people who call these people American people. They call them white people. So name giving was something that they did. I'm not justifying it, I'm saying we need to find out, but it's something that happened. So I'm glad that it's in a repository for you to put it in the history of both times. Thank you.
So Dr. Allen, thank you so much. You've always helped me. In 2018, I spoke at the University of Liberia. Really helped me the movie because I've been to two books. I want to reference. This one is all about the middle of you are something like America, hopefully or get a copy for your own references when you have to. I wrote this book also on the African continent, but working on African civil society, democratic reform, and good governance. I was writing at this project when I put here boom of great jobs in the book that I made a number of now. However, that as you know, I expect your honor your life. But you conclude by saying that the assimilation process is two ways, which is bad, right? And I'm wondering if you say it is two ways, and not really directional. Then what happened to a Burmese war to the Americas? That's what about shifts. Because the US really embraced already, African already here. What happened to the tribes? In the birth of the Congo, in the towns, what happened to the tribes? It's two ways. What happened to the tribes? The African who were brought to the Americas against their will. We know what happened. I know the process that they do. Okay. We know what happened. That's what it's changed. The land all changed. They went to the Americas. We're doing so much all the other people. They come back with guns. What happened? So what happened? You know what I do it. And then secondly, I let it go. I let it go. So that it is directional or bidirectional. And my time change or intercepted. And people like you. If it is not one. And then like speaking is a lie. Why do we do that? It is not one way. You get what I'm saying? Like people speak a lot of English, why? And we get it out.
I don't know when I understand the question completely, but I understand the question correctly. But you suggest that we speak English, so if it is bi-directional, why do we speak English? That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Yeah. So and what I'm saying is that in fact you can make an argument. You don't have to make an argument. It's obvious that assimilation policy works in Nigeria. That government in 2008 census, most Nigerians who answer the question, who respond to the question about the religious affiliation, they say we are Christian. About 80% of more in Nigeria say we are Christian. So just from that point, it's evident that assimilation works. You Christianize Nigeria. It's upwards of 80%, it will work. And also, aside from that, you look at, we speak English, even though we have that recognition of English, but we speak English. So that attempt to let English be the medium of communication, it works. The attempt to Christianize Nigerians or Africans who were here, it seemed to work. If 80% or above claim to be Christian, so I think it worked. What I'm doing, I'm asking, my question is not concerning. It wasn't only one way, there was no influence from the indigenous people, because the both have read all true subjects, they were Christianizing and civilizing them. And I think it may be
Time for one more brief question.
Thank you, Professor Butler. You mentioned that the history of Liberia, especially during this period, can be categorized in several phases. I want to know, in your research on the Afterlives of slavery and transatlantic work, and in those various phases, between the period of the early settlers, what other influences were you able to find that point to European, British colonial influences, whether it's on the commerce, on the economy? Because when you read a lot of our novels, you see mentioning of pounds and pence that are used at certain countries. Now they use the American dollars. Was there any other evidence to suggest that commerce was used from those other parts that are not traditionally in the United States, the country of the United States?
One thing I found is that the money brought up pepper is spicy pepper we obtained along the coast of Seminary and Liberia. But the greatest era of concentration was what is now the Republic of Liberia. The money brought up pepper before settlers came in that around the 15th and 16th century was being exported to Europe. I learned that, in fact, in Europe it was named the Greens of Paradise. G-R-A-I, Greens of Paradise. Now, the Greens of Paradise were used to brew beer in addition to serving as a condiment. The seasoning was used to brew beer.
in the States, there's a beer called Sam Adams beer. I went to the website for some reason, looking for something else. And they said that our beer or our beer is includes the grains of paradise. So I sent them the contact them there. They want to know where do I get the grains of paradise? Because the grains of paradise, I don't know whether it's being exported out of Liberia, except it might be exported from Nigeria, but maybe it's being exported from some other area. But Sam Adams has not given me a reply about where they have the grains of paradise, and I'm still waiting for the grains of paradise. So that's one area where I understand the question, that where the influence from Africa here. But also, let's not forget the vernacular that not needed to speak today. Before the settlers came, the crew and others on the coast, they had crew English. Also, they had crew English. And many of them had served on British ships, stevedores, working ships. And Chief Boatswain, Sour Boatswain, we call Boatswain, was the name Boatswain, we call Boatswain, that title. He was a British ship. So when they came back, after maybe 6-7 months at sea, they came back with English. But for the British, they said broken English. Broken English, but they were able to communicate with the British. And that is one of the basics of our Nigerian English. Nigerian English has several components. The crew English, the settler English, the English settler brought here today gives us, I think, a Roman English gives us the Nigerian and Nigerian English. So there was some influence. And the word Palamba, for example, that you find in our Old today. and Palava tends to suggest conflict or resolving conflict. Originally, it meant the Portuguese is derived from the Portuguese language. And what Palava means is that the Portuguese, when they came to trade to Africa, they came to trade in Africa. They wanted to trade immediately, but the Africans always wanted to sit and talk, to discuss. And they say Africans were long-winded, and they chose the word palava from their language, Portuguese language, to discuss. So they would still use palava. Even the word dash. So these are, you don't hear dash, it looks like it's fading away, but during my days, and I think Professor Taylor probably knows dash and Pastor Reed. When you go to the market to buy, after buying a market, you want the seller to give you something like this paper, an extra. You say, give me my dash. I learned that dash is a Dutch word. They were used along the coast because the Africans would say, before we start trading, give us dash. So they were exchanged gifts. The one the African got, they call it dash. So there was some mentioned.
Well, there's so much more to talk about this paper. There's so many multi-directional influences. I think Dr. Allen's like, so we need to move on with our program. So let's go ahead and give them a very warm round of applause. Thank you so much, Dr. Allen. Tell us what's next.
So let's put our hands together again for maybe another applause for the moderator. All right, sorry, I'm trying to police so that we can catch up with time a little bit. I would now just want to invite the next panelists. Please walk up to the podium. Professor Daniels is already here. Emmanuel Saboro, Michael Ovije, Monsuro Morita, Ubede Ineke. Please walk up. Yes, but in the meantime, it's my pleasure to welcome some of our special guests, and I'm delighted to introduce the arrival of the ambassador of the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Godfrey Oyudike. Please welcome. Okay, so Professor Daniels will moderate this session. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. This session will be focused on a project from the University, London College. It's called the African Abolitionism, the Rise and Transformations of African Anti-Slavery. And I'll bring the chair for this session, Dr. Benedict.
Thank you very much, everybody in the audience. Thank you to the organizers for inviting us and for all the work that a conference like this involves. Thank you to Professor David Daniels for moderating our session. As Professor Daniels said, we in this session, research session, we are researching African abolitionism. Now, in the 19th century, slavery was a widespread institution in the majority of African societies and in all African regions. At the time, we not under colonial rule, especially in the first half of the 19th century. So the project asks, when did Africans in their societies stop thinking of slavery as a legitimate institution confusion and started thinking of it as an aberration and a crime. Who were the first ideas were used in their own African languages? And which networks do they form? How do they mobilize? What are their strategies? Now, in this history, Liberia occupies an absolutely unique place at the continental level. Because in 1847, as most of you know, but it's worth reminding, Liberia becomes an independent republic and passes a constitution which in section 1 states, all men are born equally free and independent and have certain natural, inherent, and inalienable rights, among which are the rights of defending life and liberty, of acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and of pursuing and obtaining safety and happiness. And in section 4, it states, there shall be no slavery within this republic, nor shall any person resident therein deal in slaves within or without this republic. This is 1847, and it's a unicorn in the continent of Africa at that moment. We have the Sokoto Caliphate in what today is Nigeria. We have the Asante Kingdom in what today is Ghana. We have the Agadez Sultanate in what today is Niger, and the Tuareg confederations of Guinea today's nomadic herders. We have in Ottoman North African states in the north of the continent, the Moroccan Sultanate, the Sultanate of Zanzibar, today's Dahomey Kingdom. We have decentralized societies, very many of them, all around what I just described. All of these societies are neither republics, nor have they abolished slavery. There are societies where slavery, as elsewhere in the world in previous periods of time, is considered a legitimate institution, and some slave-owning persons are well respected as long as they practice slavery according to local norms and laws. So here in Liberia, there is this exception. There is this incredible historical position. But today this panel, the presentations in this panel, will look outside of Liberia and will describe the work that researchers working on African abolitionism are doing to reconstruct the thoughts, ideas, and practices of some of the early African people, groups, thinkers, intellectuals, politicians who started questioning the legitimacy of slavery in their societies. And the first two papers will focus on today's Ghana, and the second two papers will focus on today's Nigeria. The first speaker, Dr. Emmanuel Saboro, is a senior lecturer and director of the Center for African Studies and International Studies at the University of Cape Coast in Ghana. And I should add, his book, Wounds of Our Past, has just been published by Brill in April 2022. And it's an important publication on the memory of slavery as recorded in songs in northern Ghana and the oral tradition. The second presenter, Dr. Michael Odije, is a postdoctoral research fellow in the Department of History of University College London, where I'm also based. The third presenter, Dr. Monsuru Muritala, is senior lecturer at the Department of History at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. And the fourth presenter, Mr. Kutubele Nneke, is PhD candidate at the Department of History of the University of Ibadan. And without further ado, we have a very tight time, and I don't want to take more time from the presenters. Each of whom have 12 minutes to present. I will give you a notice when you have only 5 minutes left. So thank you very much, and I pass the word for presentations on the ideas of, as I said, abolitionists in the Gold Coast, that's the name of Ghana at the time, and of what today is Nigeria. Thank you, Dr. Saboro.
Thank you very much, Professor Lucy. Thanks for the opportunity to be in Liberia. Yes, gathering in Liberia some very exciting relationships. We are always friends of the kind. Like Mr. Rosie said, this paper actually is part of the broader research project on African abolitionism, transformations of slavery in Africa, led by Mr. Rosie, who is based at the University of London. She's a very phenomenal, she's portrayed the useful directions to this paper and to the rest of the research project. This paper actually also is based on a joint research by my colleague and myself. We've been working on this paper for the past couple of months. I guess that 10 to 20 minutes is quite a short time to be able to do justice to the entire paper, but I guess that in the future, when it's great, we can have the opportunity to look at some of the ideas that we are trying to espouse in this paper. So what we have been doing is to try to draw on archival sources, oral sources, and join the Ferguson's own reflections in an attempt to be able to present George Ferguson, a Ghanaian colonial civil servant, cartographer, and a surveyor in the 19th century as an anti-slavery campaigner, specifically on abolitionist. You would notice that conventional narratives and discourses on abolitionism have been centered largely on the role of Europeans in abolishing slavery and slavery. And I'm reminded by the copious literature on the Wilberforce, the Shah, the Quakers, and for those of you who are in the clergy, of course, the role of the European clergy in abolishing the slavery. But even in instances where Africans were at the forefront of anti-slavery activism, their roles have either been ignored or grossly underestimated. The 19th century, like Professor Rosie said, was a significant period in the history of the slave trade in Africa more generally, and in northern Ghana in particular, because it was during this period that scholars have argued that tremendous enslaving activities in African society. The period when slave trading activity became endemic within the Asante hinterland of the Gold Coast. Parties from Niani, collectively known as Zababa slave raiders and Asante slave dealers. The literature is written with images of the collective devastation caused by these slave raiders within these centralized communities in northern Ghana under the leadership of Babatu, Samori, and Gazali. Of all of these slave raiders who emerged during this period, Babatu is still remembered as the most ruthless. And my work has been able to demonstrate these devastation caused by Babatu and other slave raiders in northern Ghana. And like Professor Benedicta said, my book does a lot of work on that. These slave raiding parties often raided communities, plundered lives and property, and captured young men and women, and sold them in nearby slave markets such as Kapapa and Salaga, where Asante slave dealers were flying their prey. Salaga was therefore an important commercial trading empire and a melting pot in the Gold Coast because it attracted traders from both the Gold Coast trading houses and some traders from the Sahara regions who mostly came and sold gold, color, and slaves. The Asante who bought these slaves and in some cases were raiders themselves maintained these slaves within the Gold Coast mostly as domestic servants, working in the mines for coal plantations, in some cases as servants in palaces. Now, the mere mention of these slave raiders in northern Ghana still shivers down the spines of people. And it is therefore within the context of these events that the life of George Ferguson becomes important. There is a great deal of literature on George Ferguson. For those of you who are historians, you probably have read a lot about George Ferguson. There are debates about his actual role, and we often see in the literature that he is considered mostly as somebody who had played many roles, as a teacher, colonial civil servant, a surveyor, a cartographer, a geologist, an explorer, a political agent, and of course a scholar. J.B. Duncan, for example, was one of the founding fathers of modern Ghana, and even suggested that northern Ghana should be named Fergusonian to commemorate Ferguson's role in making the region a part of the Gold Coast. Ferguson's reports on his travels in northern hinterland sent back to the colonial administration revealed him as somebody who was a pioneering ethnographer, and he wrote in extraordinary detail about the local topography, the geology, the history, and the culture of the people. His writings are considered very authoritative. But what is important in all of this discourse is that historians have often ignored Ferguson's role as an abolitionist. The emphasis in the literature has always been seen on Ferguson more as a colonial civil servant, as a cartographer. His role has always been seen more, sometimes even as a colonial agent. I mean, there are a number of racist, discourses on him, and most of the debates have always been the fact that he was aiding the British colonial officials to entrench colonial people. But our paper is seeking to do a radical departure from some of these positions, to be able to establish that indeed, although scholars have paid attention to Ferguson's role as a colonial civil servant and a cartographer, his role as someone who fought against slavery has not been adequately explored. It is therefore on the basis of this possibility of discourse of Ferguson as a local abolitionist that this paper becomes relevant. In this paper, we attempt to use the life and the work of Ferguson to complicate and problematize our understanding of how he instilled the fear within the locals, particularly in some northern Ghanaian communities, as a savior whose activities help to frustrate slavery activities within the interior, or particularly within the hinterland. Ferguson entered into the modern media discourse in Ghana through the yearly what became known as the Emancipation Celebration. Emancipation Day in Ghana is a date that is set to commemorate the formal abolition of slavery in much of the British Empire. And so Ferguson has become one of the illustrious sons that Ghanaians continue to remember in his role as one of the earliest people who took a very active role in fighting against slavery. What we did was to pay a visit to what Ferguson died at a very young age, fighting slavery in northern Ghana, and he was found there. We first became interested in Ferguson when we discovered an archival document, a letter written by his wife, requesting that his body be brought back from Wa in the Upper West region where he was buried, to Anamabu, his native town in the Congo. Anamabu is just a few kilometers away from Cape Coast where I live. But the people in Wa felt that Ferguson had played such an important role in resisting and fighting and abolishing the slavery to the extent that he needed to be punished, and so therefore the advocate that he be buried in Wa. And so you can see the pictures that I put on the slides. There is a map showing where you can locate Wa in the Upper West region. And then Ferguson's grave that has been preserved today. Today it's become a historical site in northern Ghana. Now, before I conclude, let me briefly talk to you about an opinion that was shared by some of the local community people, because now Ferguson's grave site has become a place where community memory intersects history. So during the time when we visited Wa to look at his grave site, one informant felt that consistent with Wa custom, anybody who had died in a strange place or as a stranger was buried near the roadside, and it is consistent with the Wa custom to bury Ferguson just by the roadside. And that they were very categorical that because Ferguson was a cartographer, he was very influential in demarcating some of the boundaries. And this is what the man said, and I quote: "If you know your boundary, you are able to protect it, ostensibly reflecting on how Ferguson's surveying and cartographic skills and boundary communication was useful. But in northern Ghana, we didn't know whether we were in the Burkina Faso or we were in the Congo. The British couldn't come to defend the people and stop slavery. So because he came, I'm referring to Ferguson, he was able to demarcate the whole area, and he prevented other people from continuing to practice slavery on coast. This informant was convinced that by Ferguson's direct intervention, slavery and slavery would still have continued. And then I spoke to a chief who also said, quote, so if somebody had come to fight for them to stop slavery and then he died, why can't you find a place and give such a person a befitting man? So he is always remembered as someone. Yes, our great grandfathers were mistreated, some of them were carried away to go and do some serious work. So if somebody like Ferguson should come and make sure that these things were stopped, Why can't we continue to remember this? We will forever be remembered. These are community members about how we seek to problematize and still continue to reflect on the role of George and Ferguson as a local abolitionist. Like I said, my time is up. It's a very detailed work, but maybe in the future we'll have time to be able to do much more justice to the presentation of Ferguson. But Ferguson is clearly an example of a local abolitionist. So abolitionism in the Congo was not just the activity of the European people who gave us the benefit of the doubt, like helping to NC. We have local people who are involved in
So I think most people agree that the literature on slavery, the literature on slavery is very Euro-centric or Europe-centric. It focused on the activities of the European missionaries, in case of the activities of colonial officials. So the Afro project is an attempt to study African contribution to abolition, or African abolitionists. So who were the African abolitionists? What were the main ideas? If they operated in certain networks, how do you understand it? So within this, today I'm presenting the case of a particular Gold Coast, Ghana trader, Rome trader. So a particular Gold Coast trader, his name is Francis Caron. So he moved from Freetown to Gold Coast in the 1860s and died in 1897. So he was a campaigner. So he campaigned about so many things. And he was also an anti-slavery activist. So my presentation today is really based on some letters. So I've been able to uncover 32 of his letters. 11 of them are directly related to his campaign against domestic slavery in Gold Coast, in Accra, to be specific. So his strategy, but his own strategy was to write to social reformers in Europe. He was mainly writing to Aboriginal Protection Society, APS. So the modern anti-slavery international is basically the modern form of APS. So Francis Caron was writing to them, complaining about the nature of domestic slavery in the Gold Coast, and even implicating the British colonial governor at the time. So I'll start by just explaining some of the lectures in the first part of the presentation. Then in the second part, I'll describe what we can learn from these lectures relating to issues relating to, say, networks of African anti-slavery movement in the late 19th century in Accra. So this is just a picture of the letter, one of the letter. I'm not sure you can read it. So the first anti-slavery the letter is to give several examples of how the government promoted domestic slavery.
So he went to APS got the letter, and then he forwarded not the letter, they used the letter as a basis for writing a short memo and forwarded it to the colonial office in London. The colonial office did a short investigation, which basically forwarding the message they got from APS to the governor, and then the governor denied the allegation to the colonial office, and the colonial office wrote back to APS, and APS wrote back to Francis Rowan. So this went on for 4 years. So Francis Rowan would then have to come back, support his argument. In one case, he even provided court register showing the governor advising magistrates to give free slaves back to their masters. So this is basically how the letters here, 11 letters. The longest one is 64 pages, the shortest one I think is about 12 pages. Most of the letters are between 20 to 40 pages. So next person. What I'm trying to do with this letter is understand three things. One, the ideas of domestic slavery among not just him, but Gold Coast and slavery activists. Because although he was the one writing the letter, there's a great deal of collaboration involved in the letter. So from that collaboration, I'm trying to understand anti-slavery movement in Accra in the late 19th century. So these are some of his collaborations. Court officials. He managed to get confidential court register, photocopied it, sent it directly to APS. So in the second letter, he was doing how he did it. So he's basically collaborating with some court officials in Accra. So I've been able to corroborate some of the information in the letter just by looking at, last year I traveled to China, and I went to the archives. There's court records in the archive. You can trace some of the things that Francis Rowan wrote about. So apart from court officials, he also collaborated with interpreters. So in most state cases, it's usually a local interpreter interpreting to the British magistrate. So some of these interpreters are actually abolitionists, that they are opposed to domestic slavery. So Rowan collaborated with most of them. In one case, he even told the APA that some of the interpreters are willing to testify against the government because he was trying to push for an inquiry or for an investigation, but the colonial office, they were not ready for that. So apart from that, he also collaborated with other Africans, just normal Africans in the Gold Coast. So he gave the example of this particular, I can't see him in now, Colonization, who was, I think, a policeman. And the Lord gave the example in his one of the letters of a case of a slave whose mother, the mother of the slave, traced the slave to Accra. She was so happy to see her son, a young boy of 11 years old. Then the mother begged the master to free the son to her. The master refused. So some consigned Africans, including Francis Rowan, then took the master to court. So this is the example he gave. So it's not just him. So as it happens, slave owners were actually part of his network because he was writing in secret. They had no idea that he was informant. So some of them would come to him complaining. So he would take whatever they are saying and then use that information to basically implicate the British government.
So this is, I think I'm just doing. So the point of my paper is to understand the networks, the ideas, and the sort of philosophy behind the idea. He was not a Christian. He wasn't an anti-slavery activist because of Christianity. He had different ideas, different really African-based ideas to why he was fiercely opposed to slavery. I was also trying to understand the strategy, for which I can talk more about at the time here. Yeah. So, okay, then let me just use a few minutes to talk about why, the way he explained why he became an anti-slavery activist. So he said he observed a mother. I suspect that it is the particular lady, or the particular mother of the slave that was lucky enough to find her child. So he observed a mother is describing like crying to having lost her son or her child to domestic slavery. This is how he became an anti-slavery activist, something as simple as that. He even went as far as to claim that he is not opposed to domestic slavery because of Christianity. And most of the people in Accra then, they are not doing it because of Christianity. And they are also not doing it because of, as he puts it, because they are opposed to even British colonial, British colonial experiments in Gold Coast at the time. He was even in support of the British colonial experiment, but he felt that a particular governor at that point in time hated, as he puts it, Negroes, that hated black people. For this reason, he does not, William Griffith was not, he refused basically to implement became an anti-slavery activist, which is in 1890. That was the governor then. So I think maybe this is why he picked out the governor. Again, another reason is the governor is actually from West Indies. So he's a British colonial governor, but he's originally from West Indies. So for this reason, Francis Theron in his letters was able to separate the governor from the British. Basically arguing that because the governor from West Indies, he is very familiar with slavery. For this reason, he is refusing to implement the anti-slavery legislation. He was also wrong there. That was my view, because I don't think there's a huge difference between the government's approach towards domestic slavery and past and even future governments.
Very much, Michael. So now we move from Gold Coast focused papers. The first one, Georgia Conservative, so we still remember as someone who struck in against slavery by groups in the northern territories of what today is Ghana, presented by Dr. Samoro, to the case of Francis Theron, this activist in West Africa, he originated from Sierra Leone, who struggled even against those who were postulates as abolitionists in the British administration to forcibly implement their anti-slavery legislation, and who really tried to defend the rights of those exposed to slavery at that moment on the colonial rule. We now move to what today is Nigeria, and Dr. Moritala is joining us. He will sort of delve into a different context and a different religious context as well. And he's going to talk about the anti-slavery activities of people of Muslim faith.
Thank you very much. Distinguished audience. The title of my paper today is The Life of Mustafa Akamu, a historical and biographical sketch of abolitionism in colonial era. Most existing scholarly works support the bill that abolitionism of Atlantic slave trade was externally motivated by European authorities. But it is quite unscholarly that little attention has been paid to the concerted efforts made by Africans themselves to abolish slave trade. And I'm here today. What was to later become of him because he became a prominent person in the city of Lagos. He facilitated the founding of the first Muslim schools in Lagos, and by 1895, Adamu, which also the major focus of this paper, was sold to him in 1895. English was a practicing teacher and at the same time a businessman. So Adamu was sold to him in 1895. And unlike the British motivated abolitionism, Idris responded to the Islamic injunction which encourages good treatment of slaves. So in other words, it derived the inspiration to treat slaves very well, which culminated in granting freedom to Adamu, as we shall later see because of this discussion. His own action was not motivated by the ideology of the British or, the external forces, but from the Islamic injunction, what we learned from Hadith and the Quran. He granted freedom to Adamu, got him educated, integrated him into the animal family of Lagos. Yes, that is a brief thing about Idris because Idris itself is not the focus. Adamu is the focus, but there is no way I will treat Idris without mentioning, I will treat Adamu without mentioning Idris. Now, who is Mustafa Adamu? Mustafa Adamu was born a free man in Kano, but captured in the Bazaza War between 1893 and 1895 at the young age of 8. He had a history of being sold from Zaria to Katsina, from Katsina to Cairo in Egypt, from Egypt to Sokoto, and from Sokoto to Ilorin, and finally back to Lagos. One of the greatest developments in Adamu's life was being sold to Idris Ademasham in Lagos. Adamu had the privilege of both Western and Arabic education, such that in 1902, because he was able to read, he was employed by his master as an assistant shopkeeper, and he rendered excellent service with utmost trust, which of course helped him again in 1904 of being entrusted with goods that worth over 2,000 pounds. Adamu managed his master's business well until 1912, when Idris granted him freedom with a certificate and integrated him into the Ademasham family of Lagos. You see, this marked the beginning of the journey of this young man who was of the slave background into prominence in Lagos. One may begin to wonder that how did he do it? Because he ended up being an editor, a politician, a publisher. That is stigmatization that prevented him from rising up the ladder. But no, his upward mobility was not prevented because by sheer providence, he had the opportunity of marrying daughters of prominent citizens of Lagos. One of them was Chief Imam of Lagos. Then he married to the daughter of Chief Ashogun, a white-hat chief in Lagos, who was very powerful in the palace. And then Idris Animashamu, his master, he also married the daughter of his masters. So immediately he became exposed to both the traditional and Muslim elites in Lagos. Adamu in 1914 established printing office and published almanacs, posters, bills. Through the almanacs, he was able to advertise himself as an astrologer, as somebody who could predict into the future, as someone who could solve people's problems using Arabic knowledge and Islamic knowledge. As a result of this, he was a dear to people of Lagos, and he had so many lovers that he became popular. Because of this, Adamu was drafted into the Muslim crisis. There was a crisis in Lagos, and he, as the general secretary of the Muslim community, was dragged into the crisis, and the crisis generated attention of the press. There were different reports of the crisis. So Adamu, at the point now felt that being a publisher who was publishing almanacs, he felt that he should do something to save the negative reports about the Muslim crisis from other existing newspapers in Lagos. So Adamu started to invest in newspaper publishing, and don't forget, like I said, he advertised himself as an astrologer, and he had this credit that he was able to predict some certain things. He predicted successfully death of kings and chiefs, and in fact, he predicted accurately the very plague that plagued Lagos in 1934. So, because of this, Adamu ventured into the publishing business. Adamu bought the Times of Nigeria for £360 from J.B. Davis in 1918. That might be the beginning of his powerful adventure into the printing business. So, the purpose of this was to counter negative reports by other newspapers about the Lagos Muslim crisis, especially the most important paper at that period, the Nigerian Pioneer. So he succeeded in doing this. He succeeded in managing the reports in the public domain about the Muslim crisis because he was one of them. So Adamu also in Lagos ventured into politics. Because by the time he was acting as the editor of the newspaper, he became so prominent, and everybody referred him, and then there were clamors that he should join the politics of Lagos. But of course, he wasn't interested initially, but by the time he ventured into politics, he was more concerned about protecting the interests of the Muslims than he encouraged Muslims to participate in the politics of Lagos. So his active participation eventually culminated in the formation of a political party, United Muslim Party, UMP, which was formed in 1953. And he never contested election, but he was made the patron of the party. This is the story of a man who, in the last quarter of the 19th century, he was captured, sold as a slave from different masters in different regions of the world, but eventually had the opportunity of becoming a prominent citizen in the city of Lagos. And the person that manipulated him, that granted him freedom, did that not from the perspective or from the ideology of the Europeans, but from what he derived from the Holy Quran and the Hadith. So this is a total different perspective from what has been in the public domain. So I conclude that my paper has examined the rise of Adamu Animashamu, who was of lowly status but rose into prominence out of sheer determination, dedication, and commitment to protecting the Muslim community in Lagos, and he became a prominent person in the history of the Muslim community of Lagos, colonial Lagos. Thank you very much.
So we have Dr. Becky who will move from Lagos to Kogi State in central Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My paper is focused on local abolitionism, status, and the struggle for identity in central Nigeria between 1900 and 1960. By way of introduction, before 1900, slavery was an established institution that was part of the rural sociology of most of the societies in Nigeria. And beginning with 1900 with effective colonialism, this continued in most parts of northern Nigeria and Igala land to be precise. Although the title centers of Igala land on central Nigeria, but we're using Igala land because Igala land before 1900 was one of the most powerful kingdoms that functioned in the Nigeria Conference. And because this paper is a working paper, it is only in Igala land that we're able to do extensive research on now. And going forward, we'll cover some parts of Nasarawa, Benue, and Kwara. So that's why we are focusing on Igala land for now. The location of Igala land exposed Igala land to many cultures, and this led to the background of different cultures in the area. When it comes to Igala land, you find Hausa culture, Igbo culture, Nupe culture, and Edo culture. As a result of this, please move to slide 4 and 5. Let's see the map and location of Igala land. The first map is the colonial map of Nigeria. The brown section that is located at the confluence of the Niger and Benue. The other map is the current map of Nigeria. No. Yeah. So you see that Kogi State is at the center now, the modern Nigerian map. And as a result of this, it is exposed to human traffic from both north and south. And in literature, the area has been referred to as an area that sits in the transition belt between the north and south. So cases and cases of slavery were high in this area. Despite the fact that colonial abolished slavery in Igala land between 1903 and 1907 through the proclamation, it continued until the 1930s due to the instrumentality of slavery in the domestic economy of this area. It was until the integration and emergence of local abolitionists that the British administration were able to bring the trade and daily slave to a halt. This paper is sectioned into understanding the area that we are looking into, which I've explained, while status, slavery at the eve of 1900. At the eve of 1900, in the societies are studying Ejolojeme, Onale, Ekume, Ayimba, and Ida. Slaves were not permitted to live, see, and interact with the freeborn. Neither were they considered to be present at the decision-making process in the society. It will be shocking for people in Liberia to know that as early as 1900, people were still discriminated against, people were not allowed to sit together, mingle in the society. This happened in Nigeria and it still happened in some parts of Nigeria. Having said that, the inability of the colonial administration to bring the trade and bring the slave to a port led to the emergence of some traders who emerged and started reporting to the British colonial master administrators about the identity of people that were still holding on to slaves and denying them the right to education and certain privileges in the society. So we'll look at these individuals one after the other. One was Shagana Ogodani and Peter Anago. These two were the early people from Igala land to work with the colonial administrators and the missionaries. As a result of their exposure to the missionaries before 1900, they became the people that started working with the new district officers that were appointed in Igala land. And through this, they started going into the interior, reporting chiefs that were still holding on to slaves and denying them access to land and access to education. Because the denial to access to land and education was the tool that the king and slave owners were still using to subject them to control. So when these two individuals emerged, once they report to the colonial administrators, the colonial administrators will locate the house of whoever is holding on to slaves, pick the slaves from there, enroll those at house, we have a full age in school, and take others to the various nation house in Igala land where their identity were not known. Through this, they became abolitionists in a particular context because they started feeding the colonial information that they did not have. And through that, they were able to contain the excesses of slave dealers and people that were involved in this business and movement around the Liberia and Congo by the local government to be precise. The other parts of Igala land, Ida, Anyamba, and Ibume, these areas were more or less heterogeneous societies and commercial societies. And the nature of slavery and abolitionism in these areas differ from the areas to where which are mostly homogeneous and agrarian societies. In either, people like Abichi Aikoye and Osonia Ape, these two women were commercial persons, merchants, who took advantage of the abolition to recruit people of slave descent into the commercial empire as buying agents, processors, and the rest. And through this, they brought on board a system of apprenticeship where the former slaves get skills and upon certain years, like 4 or 5 years, they will be sent to other communities where they will start buying goods for their advocates. So this gave them a social net and a social and economic network through which people of slave descent started getting located from the societies where they lived as slaves, became free and distributed again. This happened in the movement through the activities of Omaye. Then Peter Chinuku was one of the earliest politicians in Igala that worked with NPC. As far back as 1940, his petition against Igala of participating in slave dealing, and through this, their son Igala was remanded and accused. And at the very of being thrown, he went to the Kina and hung himself. He committed suicide. So Peter Chinuku participated because of an elite. He wrote several letters to the colonial administrators to have them from the National Archives in Kaduna. We also have Gabriel Ndoku, who was the first person to marry a British slave descent from Igala land, despite the objection of his family members. And because he did this, people started picking people of slave descent in Igala land as white, despite the fact that they are still being objected. Then we have attack of Omoshege. Is an attack of Igala between 1929 to 1940. In 1930, as a result of the Great Economic Depression, issues of slavery remained in some parts of Igala land, especially Congo and Monrovia. And as a result of this, attack of Omoshege took it upon himself and promised that anybody that will feed him with information that will lead to the arrest of people that are still dealing in slaves and sacrificing slaves to idols will be given £5. As a result of this, about 5 persons reported and got £5. And he was able to follow the case up, and those that were arrested and found wanting were sent to the colonial prison. So we are seeing these persons as abolitionists because they were able to control the excess of the slave dealers and merchants because the colonial administrators couldn't penetrate the interior and didn't have the information to fight the battle. But with their emergence, they were able to provide useful information and create a self-help for people of slave descent. But this paper discovered that the trajectories were different in Igala, and despite the fact that it is the same geography. In the agrarian areas, although people of slave descent enjoy relative freedom, but there are still elements of passive slavery because people of slave descent don't have access to land, don't participate in political associations, don't participate in legal associations, don't have the right to title. But in either Anyamba and in women, the case is different because of the commercial nature of the town. And because these other 3 communities are exposed to high traffic of humans, people of slave descent through the acquisition of skills that they got from Abichi Aikoye Pastor Isaac Amana, who brought them out of the interior, got them a role as apprentices, upon their graduation as apprentices and agents, moved from this area to other parts of Igala land and Nigeria, and started coming back as merchants to Igala land. They were able to integrate them and take them off that class of slaves. But there is still another case and crisis of identity in Unale and in Logebe Athletes. And that field that we'll have to look into. Thank you. Thank you.
Let's give a round of applause again for slavery. As has already been mentioned, sometimes in the area only focus on European abolitionists as if they are the agents in the center, and these papers have shown that there's African abolitionists in both local and in more widespread regional areas. As you know, has become our custom, we will ask you to ask a question. Can everyone say after me, a question? Okay, no speeches, please. And so we like to score questions, if that's possible, and then 4 questions, and we want to do this in 15 minutes or less. So I see some hands back here. I see a hand over here. I think I see 2 hands, and I see one in the back. Your question, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. My question is directed to the last speaker. I talked about the abolitionism of slavery in Central Nigeria. You talked about the influence of the Igbos and the Hausas and other ethnic groups on the Igala people. I was just wondering, was it deliberate that you didn't mention the Bassa people? Looking at the fact that you talked about Kopene and Ivan and also the Kina and all that, was it a deliberate thing that you did there and all that? And secondly, there's this concept that within Kogi State that the Igala people look down on the Bassa people. Do you think it is connected to the slave trade that was happening within that region, or I was just curious.
Thank you. About the Bassa people in Central Nigeria will become Nigeria. Second question. Okay. There's a question over here.
So some of you touched on this in your paper. Since there's so little time, I just wanted any of you who want to elaborate. Is that one of the justifications of colonialism that is used to morally justify is that we're abolitionists. And so I was wondering if you could say more about the strategies these local abolitionists use to either work with or to work against the colonial regime in meeting their objective. So.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. My question to the speaker that spoke about Mustafa. He made mention of the relevant work that done by this brother. But looking at Benin State, that was well known as one of the areas that was accommodating slavery. And I want to inquire if Mustafa Adum work also covered that, or was it done in Lagos?
Great, thank you. And one last question.
My question is for all of you. How, if any, if at all, the freedom of independent state in Liberia in 1847, how did that influence the work of the abolitionist movement in your areas?
Thank you. Yes, so the first question was about the Bassa.
Thank you for your question. It was not deliberate because I was looking at North Central Nigeria, and Bassa, the Bassa are part of northern Nigeria and central Nigeria. Talking about the Igala looking down on the Bassa. It's technical. It depends on the angle you are looking at it from. The Bassa people were the last set of people that migrated into the area at the point that the Igala were moving from the confluence of the Niger and Benue. And the Bassa people moved into this area because they were trying to flee from the slave traders. And because the concept of a slave is loose, some Igala started looking at this set of people that were running away as slaves. In a loose context, I'm not saying that the Bassa are slaves, but the purpose of the paper, if it were to be a full paper, you see where we try to conceptualize and contextualize who is a slave. Because slavery started in Igala land as a punishment system where people that were seen as difficult to peace were banished, and at the time they started being sold out. So I want to see anybody in the bush who can explain anything about who or identity. It should be taken that that person is someone that will vanish from his or her community. And anybody that sees him or her will take that person as a slave. So the Bassa people were seen as people that were running from the movement slave traders. And that is why the Igala people at times, they call traditional Igala people, see them in a loose context as slaves. But to me, it's a different thing. They were running from the slave traders. They crossed over to Lokoja. From Lokoja, around 1840, they moved to the Kobe area. And that led to a situation between the Bassa and the Igala, and they even fought a war, which the Bassa war. And the Igala society to also protect from the slave trade. Because slavery became wasn't the currency then, the kingdom became the weak kingdom and couldn't defend itself against the encroachment of the Bassa people. So they would be having bad blood. And in order to just put down and say, don't mind them, they are slaves. So that's that. Then the strategy is used by the local abolitionists. Like Amana, for instance, Pastor Amana, he was educated at the Bible Mission Secondary School. Upon his graduation, he went to either become a carpenter, and as a carpenter, he went from his community, started going back to Nale, his community, to bring people of self-defense into his carpentry workshop as apprentice. Whereas where he comes from, a slave cannot sit or live in the same room with a freeborn. But because he was living away from his community, and as a carpenter who needs apprentice, instead of taking people where he has to go back to his community to bring people of slave descent. Aside working for him in his workshop, trying to create a network between people of slave descent, Igbo artisans in Igala land. That is on the one side, and for Analog and Oshagana also that they added as informants that provided the British administrators and district officers with information about people that were still holding onto slaves in their domain, and people that were not allowing free slaves to have access to education, and through that, people in this category were given freedom, access to education, and the opportunity to move away from the community and start a new life elsewhere. Peter Chibuku was a politician who petitioned against Igala to the British for cases that revolved around slavery, and that led to the suicide committed by Hassan Ahmed. So the strategies differ, and others use commerce as buying agents and the rest. Right, thank you.
Well, so strategies about that, the strategies that views. Let me be very specific on Ferguson. Ferguson's education and his skills and training as a cartographer and surveyor was immensely useful because the hinterland where the slave raiding activities were endemic was a far-to-reach area. Most Europeans were very reluctant to go. And he, of course, was Ghanaian, and he was familiar with the local economy, familiar with the terrain, he was familiar with identifying the slave raiding routes that were used by slave raiders. And based on this knowledge, he was able to advise and said that, look, these particular areas were the areas that slave raiders mostly used. And that's the reason why he died in that effort, because he died in the hands of slave raiders. So that knowledge, that cartographic knowledge that he had was an immensely useful skill that was particularly very instrumental in helping to map out some of these areas. The issue about Liberia, it's not too clear what I can say, but Liberia became a model, of course, for most people who were educated because they had to read and to learn about the Liberian story. And so therefore, I guess that because of this kind of education that the fancy elites, particularly within the Gold Coast, had, they were able to get a lot of information about how Liberia became a state having, for example, for free slaves and all of that. And that probably would have influenced the ways in which they talked about local abolitionist efforts and the ways in which they talk about some of these questions. That's a little, I'm sure I can say about the influence of Liberia on some of these local abolitionists.
Question about this.
Thank you very much. Well, on the question asked on Mustafa, whether his influence expanded in the new region, let me say that Benin and Lagos are different societies. And Mustafa lived in Lagos, he died in Lagos, and I have not come across any document that points to the fact that perhaps he did some things in Benin. But that is not to oppose the fact that I may decide to move for it, but I don't know if the person that asked the question, if he has read something on this about which I may not have read. So perhaps it's opening my easy to further research. Thank you very much.
Is there a question from where?
Let me just ask you a question about the sort of where the tension, I imagine that the question you're asking is where the tension between African abolitionists and sort of the colonial, because you said the justification for colonialism was abolition of slavery. There was a huge tension in the case of Ghana. So Ferguson is actually an outlier. Ferguson was out of touch with educated families in his own region. They hated him because he was in support of British. He was basically a civil servant under the colonial government. So his contemporaries hated him. So there was a direct tension between African and the slavery activists and colonial government in Ghana. So the tension started in 1861. When then Ghana was not really a colony, it was a protectorate. But the then British government created a policy basically to deny slaveholding to educated Ghanaians, so to educated people in Ghana. He did this in order to cut off the advantage that they had over white settlers in Ghana. So they reacted against it. So you move to 1868, there was a little tension to it. 1874, when the British abolished domestic slavery, African abolitionists were directly opposed to the way that the British went about to the sort of the model used by the British government to abolish domestic slavery. They used something called the Indian model. So under the Indian model, it's called the Indian model because the British used it in India a couple of decades before 1872. Because for them to pass a law saying slaveholding now is a criminal act, but then without implementing the law, the assumption is within 1 or 2 generations, slave masters will keep on holding slaves now, but within 1 or 2 generations, the change will occur. But we see the Gold Coast abolitionists were opposed to that. They wanted a sharp break from slavery. So the example of David Bates would be James City, who was greatly influenced by Afrikaners. That's the touch of the second question about Nigeria, the influence of Nigeria. I would say that there's more influence of Sierra Leone. In the case of Ghana, there's no influence of Sierra Leone as opposed to Nigeria. Somebody like Afrikaners hurting in his book 1868, I think, was really widely read among educated fancies in Ghana. The book actually influenced fancy population, influenced people like James Blue. So I would say there's more evidence of influence from Sierra Leone, especially Cape Town, as opposed to Nigeria. But I imagine that maybe later down the road, when the pledge is started writing, I'm sure there's some influence there. But I think Sierra Leone is more of Sierra Leone as opposed to Nigeria.
Can we give a round of applause for all our participants as well as here? Thank you so much. Please, could you join me just to say thank you again for this event.
And to Professor Daniel, who moderated, a big hand of applause. Yeah, I mean, there's no denying the fact that this is an important contribution. It complicates the picture, and I'm very happy that we, early career African scholars who are contributing to telling this story, and that is why the conversation we are having here would not end here. So publication is imperative. We want to contribute to the discourse, and I think this is an important intervention, as well as other papers we'll be listening to here. So congratulations, and we really encourage you to continue to dig into the archival sources that will help to enrich the whole discourse around the abolition. All right, I think we are doing good, and in preparation for the third keynote session, which will be our main last session for this morning, and for being so patient, enduring and listening, and not dozing off, I want to award and present to you 9 minutes of getting up, stretching, relaxing. If you want to use the most important rooms in this building, please do so. But at 12 on the dot, we'll commence the major session. So please take advantage of the 9 minutes award and stretch and use the restroom. Gentle ladies and gentlemen, please could we take our seats? Please take your seats. We have too many presenters standing. I'm very delighted that we are going to have the third keynote this morning. And I don't know about you, but I'm really looking forward to this session. And I would like to again thank Dr. Cassandra Martinez, who graciously accepted to moderate this session. And I will now hand over to her to introduce the keynote speaker, and we'll take it from here. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's my honor to be able to introduce you to Professor Janice McLean-Farrell, who is the Director Lane Assistant Professor of Metro-Urban Ministries and Assistant Dean of Cultural Studies at the New Theological Seminary, where she's been working since 2018. She's held a number of very prestigious academic appointments, including at the Seminary of New York, the Theological Seminary at the School of Intercultural Studies in Pasadena, California, at the Theological Seminary at Grand Rapids, Michigan, and at the University of Edinburgh, the New College School of Divinity, where she also completed her doctoral studies. She has a very long and impressive list of publications. I just wanted to mention two. First, her book monograph, which is titled West Indian Pentecostals, Living Their Faith in New York and London. She also co-edited a volume titled Understanding World Christianity, the Vision and Work of Andrew F. Walls, for which she received a number of awards. Her research interests range from religions in the African diaspora to Christianity in the Caribbean, urban immigrant youth and religion, to women and migration, and the list goes on there as well. Outside of the academy, she's active both as youth leader and urban pastor, and we very much look forward to hearing from her today.
Thank you, everyone, to the president of University of Liberia, the conference organizers, colleagues, students. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. I think for this conference, I'm the one who presents the Caribbean side of the story. And so today, I would invite you to join me as we travel to my homeland, the country of Jamaica. So the title of my talk today is Doomed from the Beginning. And I should have put that in, that's in quotation marks, question mark. An examination of 19th century Afro-Jamaican missionaries in Africa. Between 1841 and 1846, 3 missionary societies and contingents of Afro-Jamaicans to West Africa. The impetus for these adventures were multiple. Next slide, please. One was the idea of divine providence. This is the idea that God's providential hand was at work within the slavery enterprise. William Knibb, a prominent Baptist missionary and ardent anti-slavery campaigner, stated, quote, "Whatever may have been the designs of man, whatever he may have contemplated in enslaving Africa, we know that the moral governor of the universe have other designs superior to them all." So this idea basically articulated that slavery was sanctioned by God. And the Christianization processes that the slaves underwent in the US, but also within the Caribbean, armed them as divinely chosen to take Christianity back to Africa. Another idea, which is the native idea exposed by Sir Thomas Buxton, a leader in the Emancipation Act of 1833, in a book entitled The African Slave Trade and Its Remedy. As many in Britain and its colonies celebrated the successful passage of the Emancipation Act in 1833, the nation was confronted with its ongoing ineffectiveness to thwart the expansion of trade in enslaved peoples on the African continent. First, during the period when Britain was involved in the slave trade, it became a vital component in commerce of various African kingdoms. European products, especially weapons, received in the exchange of slaves, facilitated the expansion, strengthening, and consolidation of rule over neighboring ethnic groups. And as a result, you have different kingdoms who were very invested in the slave trade continuing because it allowed them to maintain their kingdom. Eventually, the slave trade became a primary commodity for many kings and chiefs and the kingdoms they ruled. So while Britain had stopped its trade, the plantations of the New World, specifically Brazil, the Spanish Caribbean, and the United States, were increasing their demand for slave labor. The second point of this idea of native agent is in the fight to stem this trade, various European agents were sent to Africa. Unfortunately, many did not live long enough to begin the work on stopping the slave trade. Thus, according to Buxton, the solution to bring an end to the slave trade was twofold. One, protecting and encouraging legitimate commerce, such as agriculture and other commercial ventures. And two, and this is the quote, the necessity of raising the native character by imparting Christian instruction. In Buxton's own words, he says, quote, let missionaries and schoolmasters, the plow and the spade go together. It is the Bible and the plow that must regenerate Africa, end quote. In raising the native character, though, through Christian impartation was dependent on individuals who would become a strong force in bringing about deliverance of Africa. Given the obstacle the African climate posed for European agents, he states, quote, we must look to the natives themselves to be agents in this great enterprise, end quote. Eventually, the idea of native agents was expanded to also include the sons of Africa, that is, the descendants of Africans in the diaspora who would, quote, be impervious to the diseases of their motherland and would enthusiastically respond to her call for help. And so the missionary enterprises, the missionaries I will talk about today, were a part of this visioning of how the West Indians had become an impetus for African missions in the 19th century. However, there was also an additional reason behind the Afro-Caribbeans being involved in the missionary ventures to Africa, and that was their freedom. For many, now free, part of their response to that freedom was to get about the task of taking Christianity back to the African continent. As Last Newman notes of the Baptists, within the congregations, Baptist missionaries nurtured, quote, the claim of Africa, which meant taking on board the images and perceptions, problems and challenges, and also the need of Africa's redemption, end quote. Tied to this Christianization process was a civilizing one. They were to tame the savage. As such, the Afro-Jamaicans were to serve as living examples of Christian and civilized blacks. So Andres Rees, the leader of the Basel mission, he says it this way. He hopes that these repatriates, chosen for their religious devotion as well as their technical skills as farmers and craft workers, would form the nucleus of a Black Christian community on the Gold Coast, end quote. These sentiments, though spoken about in regards to the Gaza mission, express the common views Europeans have of Afro-Jamaican missionaries. So as a result of these impetuses, you have the emergence of 4 missionary ventures from the Caribbean to West Africa. I will focus on the 3 that came out of the Jamaican context. So you have the Baptist missionaries from Jamaica to Cameroon, 1841 to 1833. The Basel mission with Moravians from Jamaica to the Gold Coast, 1842 to 1870. And the Presbyterian mission from Jamaica to Calabar, Nigeria in 1846. According to Steve Emile and JFA Ajayi, the Afro-Jamaican missionaries involved in all 3 ventures, with some exceptions like Joseph Jackson Fuller and Catherine Mowbray, as well as the fellow members of the Basel mission, was a failure. Next slide, please. They saw this, and the way they interpret this failure is they saw within the Afro-Jamaican missionaries a failure to adapt to the African society. This all changed with the arrival of these 3 denominations. So offered enslaved peoples the power of belonging. In that, quote, slaves and free coloreds and blacks were admitted into membership in these denominations with full membership. So it didn't matter if you were a free Black person, you were a colored person, or you were a slave. You had the same rights and privileges as everybody else. And they inhabited key leadership roles in the church. They were the lay preachers, the deacons, and advisors to missionaries, etc. So as Shirley Gordon notes in God Almighty Made Me Free, she says, in short, the sustained work of the conversion of the mass of the population was affected by the efforts of free-colored and slave leaders. End quote. Thus, in the essence, the activation with the accompanying power and authority, we see the processes being fostered within the enslaved people, that slavery itself was focused on undermining and erasing. Within the Jamaican slave society, enslaved peoples were also found other means of fostering their self-sufficiency through the peasant system. So the peasant system was this system that they had in place on the plantations, that the slaves were given land where they would grow. There were allotted a portion of land where they would cultivate certain food items like potatoes, plantains, yam, and other produce. According to Patterson, beginning in quote the 1720s, a peasant system had developed to the stage where the majority of enslaved people would provide for themselves, and many of the more industrious had already begun to sell their excess produce at Sunday markets. So you have happening at this time that the slaves have ways of generating income and revenue for themselves. So what do they do with these funds? With these funds, enslaved people, quote, were able to purchase and rear poultry, cattle, and small stock. So they're activating their self-sufficiency. And then by the middle of the 18th century, enslaved peoples were, quote, the slave providers, producers of vegetable and cash crop for the people. According to Mary Turner, quote, the slaves functioned as free peasants, promoted the survival and development of precisely those intellectual capacities which the slave system was intended to destroy, namely curiosity about the world and determination to exert control over life. As she notes, to their established right to leave the plantation and trade at the Sunday markets was added the opportunity to attend the mission churches. To their ability to earn money and buy goods was added the opportunity to contribute to their church and achieve status within it. The missionaries, moreover, addressed themselves to slaves as people with souls to be saved, capable of intellectual and moral judgments. And the activities they encouraged were presented in a philosophical framework that posited the spiritual equality of all men. The slaves' rights as producers and traders encouraged them to develop a sense of their right as laborers on the estate, end quote. Can we move to the next slide, please? Post-emancipation context and really focusing on this acquisition of status. In post-emancipation Jamaica, missionaries were instrumental in facilitating the enslaved people's acquisition of land by establishing free villages. The missionaries, particularly the Baptists, would acquire large plots of land that were, so these plots of land, some of them were formerly a part of the plantation. So they would buy these plots of land and then subdivide them. Quote, aspiring freeholders would obtain land and building materials on systems of extended payment. So because the emancipated slaves are former enslaved people were members within their communities, they would get loans, purchase these lands, subdivide them, and then resell it to them. So you have in this process the emergence of land ownership for the formerly enslaved peoples. This relationship was mutually beneficial. Quote, the missionaries benefited by raising numbers appreciative of their support and willing to build chapels and schools and symbols of the kind of communities they were seeking themselves. Settlements of contented peasantry ready to work on the sugar estates and to grow their own food crops seemed assured that if they had their own cottages, provision grounds, a chapel, a school, and a mission home. So in many ways, you're forming these very vibrant communities. Each community, however, would be denominationally specific. So Depending on who the missionaries were, who bought the land and subdivided it and sold it to you, those were the ones who lived in those spaces. So in these communities, on the missionary side, you basically have this emergence of a new consolidated and committed mission. The members had easy access to a chapel and a school for their family, while they built up further status as smallholders. Note, however, that other emancipated and enslaved peoples also set up their own settlements, so it wasn't just what the missionaries did. And in these cases, these settlements were tied, while they weren't tied to specific denominations, and the members could decide for themselves which denomination they wanted to align to. Oftentimes it was the Baptist. According to Shirley Gordon, quote, the missionaries offered a model for a lifestyle that would give ex-slaves self-respect and status symbols in standards of respectability sustained by Christian morality, end quote. This, she argues, the respectability coincided with the ideas of the life of freedom that formerly enslaved peoples had for themselves. In fact, even in the remote communities without any missionary contact, they too, quote, aspired to the missionary culture on their own initiative. In this context, the smallholders were actively engaged financially and otherwise in building and maintaining chapels of their own. With ownership came the right to speak not only to the missionaries in Jamaica, but the governing bodies in Britain. As Gordon notes, quote, independent opinions were a long-standing tradition among stewards and members of Princeton Methodist chapels, the same in the Baptist and Moravian traditions as well. This tradition continued post-emancipation, and in terms, this is a way where the Afro-Jamaicans were able to reap the benefits of the status that these communities provided. The Afro-Jamaican self-supporting practices also came to the fore in the missionary ventures to Africa. They would raise their own funds and to send out the missionaries that would come from Jamaica to Africa. The educating of Afro-Jamaican young men for missionary work in Africa at the Baptist Calabar College became yet another expression of self-actualization. In this manner, they were transitioning from, quote, chapels and day schools to seeking fields of service appropriate to their undaunted ability, and I would add status. You need status. According to Gardner, these young men, quote, were obviously a source of pride to their families and to their chapel communities. And so, end quote. And it's in this manner that Afro-Jamaicans, with the aid of Christianity and education, acquired status and the associated positions in various communities and in the wider society. Next slide, please. So what happens when they get to the field? When they're in these places in Africa. So in encountering racism on the field, this was the Afro-Jamaican response. We are not second-class people, nor will we be. In all three missionary ventures, the Afro-Jamaicans encountered a missionary reality where they were deemed by the white European missionaries to be deficient and lacking in the qualities needed to lead such an enterprise. This translated into the Afro-Jamaicans being placed in various supporting roles. There were schoolmasters, printers, skilled workers, farmers, housemakers, etc. And they were being offered less pay, different further options, and educational opportunities for their children in comparison to their European compatriots. Many were even abused by the European missionaries. Poirier, in his article on the Basel mission, He narrates the experience of Afro-Jamaican missionaries who participated in the Basel mission. He notes how the toxic relationship between Reese, who was the European who led the missionary enterprise there, precipitated an eventual precipitated among the Afro-Jamaicans an eventual dissatisfaction with life in Africa, including clothing and food distribution, he states. Although all of them grumbled that the clothing was inadequate, it seems that Hosford grumbled the loudest. Reese, in his anger, had him flogged by Asham, foreman of the laborers. When the rod used by Asham broke, Reese completed the punishment with his feet and fists. The missionary Ernst Savard noted, quote, that the West Indians had faults, but were wrongly treated by Reese, who nevertheless had good intentions. As the scholar John Miller notes, Reese's troublesome relationships with Africans and the chorus of disapproval from both blacks, which is the Afro-Jamaicans and fellow missionaries, caused the committee quietly to withdraw him from the Gold Coast on grounds of impaired health and a disturbed frame of mind. For many Afro-Jamaicans who were socialized in the self-actualization processes in their native land, the position of second-class missionary was reprehensible. According to Gordon, the reactions of the Afro-Jamaican missionaries to the practices they encountered, quote, was an interesting case of missionary culture being applied to their situation in Africa. They expected respect from their European colleagues and from the BMS, Baptist Missionary Society, and other missionary agencies, support for educational opportunities for their children, similar to what was offered to European missionaries, end quote. For the Afro-Jamaicans, it was imperative for them to maintain their status as, quote, foreign missionaries, and be afforded the rights and privileges associated with that. While some missionaries like Joseph Jackson Fuller remained in the field, others chose to return to Jamaica. In the interim, they also wrote letters to their families and churches in Jamaica, documenting their experience within the mission field and thereby discouraging future missionaries from making the journey. Next quote, please. In terms of what was their interaction with the African indigenous people, we are outsiders, or I should say, we remain outsiders. According to Wariboko, in seeking to maintain their outsider foreign identity, the Afro-Jamaicans, quote, could be considered for analytical purposes as strangers and liminal entities in their ancestral homeland. To gain membership as fully integrated participants in the African community, however, would involve a transition from the state of liminality to the state of communitas, end quote. Such a transition process, though not impossible, was not one the Afro-Jamaican missionaries wanted to or were prepared to make. As the lauded example of the Christianized and civilized people of African descent, whose view of the African continent had been indelibly shaped by Western views of the continent's darkness and barbarism, and whose education, culture, comportment, palate, religious beliefs and practice, etc., were aligned with the model after a distinctive European standard. Embracing the status of communitas with the Africans would require the disruption of life and status as they knew it, and reconnecting with the African parts of the Afro-Jamaican culture that the Christianization and civilization enterprises had demonized within the Jamaican context. For those bearing the pride of their communities, going native and inserting themselves fully within the African society required critical interrogative decolonial skills and processes that allows one to both name the Black internalization of European identity. Such skills like what Fanon talks about, blackface, or what's that word? Blackface, white mask. Those skills would not come until the 20th century. So by way of conclusion, next slide please. What are the implications of what I've just narrated? What scholars may see as failure to adapt to the African society, or Afro-Jamaicans thinking more highly of themselves, is in reality the actualization of a certain outlook that has been nurtured within the Christianization, and I would say civilization processes of enslaved peoples. It was further developed in post-emancipation period around the acquisition of status and land, and then lived out on the African context in the form of missionary work. As we consider the afterlives of slavery, it is important to note the significance of that agency and celebrate it. However, it is also imperative to critique the Black internalization of European identity and views, and how that continues today in various forms within the transatlantic world. It is also to name the ways we hold each other suspect, not recognizing, so Afro-Jamaicans hold Africans suspect back then, but in today's contemporary world, people of Black descent hold each other suspect in different contexts. And so it's not recognizing the common expressions we experience as people of African descent within the transatlantic world, and the need to overcome it in our contexts and together. Finally, it is to diversify the historical mission stories, so the narrative of failures move beyond this binary or myopic views to give us a fuller sharing of our fraught and complex story. Thank you.
Thank you for that very inspiring presentation. We have enough time for questions now. We can take a couple at a time, if that's okay with you. Okay. So, the microphones are circulating around the room. If you have questions or comments, please raise your hand.
Okay, so no one is putting up the hand.
This is a comment, and
I think your conclusion, I just wanted to piggyback on the point you made of the Can I hear me? All right, so, and I think we need to interrogate that and perhaps think about how to diffuse those tensions and mutual suspicion that exists between, Africans and African Americans and Afro-Jamaicans, and it's a complex one. Especially, for instance, as where I noted how Africans are suspicious of African Americans and the attitudes that go with that, and African Americans are suspicious of Africans in a way they say, well, it's your ancestors that put us into this crazy experiment that we're having. And I think that it's much more complicated. And I think papers we are listening to also point out how the enterprise, even within Africa, is as complicated. And that is just one trope in understanding this messy business. So thank you for sharing that at the end. And I think we might need to have another conference here to just think about this mutual, suspicion and how to deal with it, because it is not getting us anywhere. Thank you.
And one response I would have is,
Thank you for this wonderful conference. That brought a lot of information. For my own setting, experience, I found a lot of this discussion in the history of Liberia. We see ourselves when we learn one side of the history, which of course is very sad for many of us to study. Today, I'm so impressed to hear the Jamaican side of the story and to hear the Ghanaian side of the story. And one person that always said when I was coming up to grade school, why are we so learning the Ghanaian history, the Nigerian history, the Sunday Empire, the Malay Empire, and our own empire, which is Liberia? We don't have the needed history that will inform us. So today, getting the pieces, if we are bringing my mind back that we have to rewrite our own history. So I feel so impressed. And right now, when the question was asked, how can you link the Liberian scenario to that of Ghana and England? And I felt so shocked when one of the panelists said, connecting countries, they will put a kind of ceremony, and it broke me down. With the wealth of knowledge that our people have out there, what can this knowledge transform for us as young people that we were able to share our own history out there? Because everything we see about our history is one-sided. It is written by the settlers and the Utopia side of the history. And what was indigenous, we did not see it in our own history. So coming to this forum today brought a lot of things to my mind. And we are left behind as a nation and youth to be able to sell our own kids out there. So to the organizers, I want to say thank you for this enlightenment. Because when we are confronted with our colleagues, we want to also sell the Liberian scenario. Thank you.
So in terms of, I'll start the responses even while the others get questions together. So let me start with the one the person in yellow shirt you just asked about learning your own history. So for myself, this history isn't one that's taught in Jamaica. I didn't grow up in Jamaica learning about the Afro-Jamaican missionaries to Africa. It's not a part of what we get in school or even what you get in churches. And so my interest in this was my personal interest and then exercising my agency to go and do the research. But it also means that, and you're right, history is written from the side of the victors. The victim most times do not have a part in the story. Their part in the story was that they're conquered. And so it's, when we are reading history, is to recognize that there are power implications associated with who has the right to record that history. Which views are they taking? What are they putting forward? And so you begin to question that history. You complexify, you tease it up, you recognize that nothing is not black or white. It's never black or white. Humans aren't black or white. We're very complex beings with each of our own intricate stories. And so the same applies to the history, the historical discourse. And so it is reading, paying attention to oral history, putting that on the same level as what is documented,
and begin slowly to educate yourself. You know, educational institutions, yes, we're focused on educating, but we only do so much at times. They're budgetary. You were here yesterday for the panel on the presidents of universities. They're managing a lot, but I'll say to you what I say to my students, the first class every class I teach, I say this in the same statement, the first class for the course. I'm inviting you to co-create knowledge with me this semester. Because you have an active process, an active role in the creation of knowledge. You do not enter the educative process as blank slates. You enter it with agency. And so we exercise our agency in doing the hard work of learning. And so that means that you are reading probably outside of what's on the syllabus to make sure that you're getting as balanced a view as possible. So that's where I started, and I offer that to you as a place to start. In regards to the mutual suspicion, it's recognizing that the mutual suspicion is cultivated with intentions. It doesn't happen. The colonization processes in the US, throughout the Caribbean, that we see in Africa, it's all related, it's all tied together, it is all intentional. And so if you're gonna conquer a house, it is best to divide it. And so it is recognizing that as people of the transatlantic, we've all been acted upon. We've internalized the colonization process. So in many ways, in the Jamaican context, it's us coming to terms with our internalization of colonization. What I presented today in terms of agency, that was the view of the middle class Afro-Jamaicans, because they were the ones in the missionary churches. The lower class African Jamaican process was very different. They were the ones who held to more to the traditional African beliefs and practices. Some of them were in the missionary churches, and they said, your type of Christianity basically reinforces the slavery processes of supporting the status quo. That is not what freedom. That's not what you did during freedom. And so a lot of them turned to more African, Afro-Jamaican religious practices. So it's recognizing that what I've presented today is a slither of the complexity that's being on ground in Jamaica. And it's something that we continue to grapple with because as I said in a paper I wrote with Matthew Clark about Codgeton College in Barbados, Christianization throughout the Caribbean has come in an external cost. And in many ways we have yet to take Christianity out of the European plot and root it firmly within the Caribbean soil. So that has to be done in the Caribbean, it has to be done in Africa, it has to be done in the US. And then from that place, we come together and begin to work and collaborate with each other. Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. There was one all the way at the top. And then we'll come down.
So let me say thank you for the presentation. I heard somewhere, I want to believe, the issue of Afro-Americans, Africans, like we are today, the missionaries, colonization, it's such complex because it takes us back and sometimes it leaves our hearts. For example, I walked through blacks and whites in Baltimore and I went out with peers. I've been to Senegal, Monrovia Island, the Gate of No Return, and that's another place that brings grief to the heart. Here we are in Liberia. And I think this forum should be elevated to another level. It stems from several factors, and there are root causes that some of us will not relate to properly, not knowing what our forefathers were either coerced to get engaged with in trading human beings, and then vice versa, Christianity came, colonization came, there became a bigger dichotomy. Those who came alienated from their origin, and of course came with new mindset, new ideas or education, dismantled or somehow affected the traditional beliefs. And in the situation of Liberia today, it's so disheartening. 175 years, whether the education brought positively has impacted us, and if you took the ratio of illiteracy here in Monrovia and the rest of the country to the literate population, is such disgusting. And I think the processes has affected all of us, considering those factors of the colonization, education, governance, in the economy, whatever, social economic fields. We need to encourage such a forum where our identity will be traced. Not 100% any longer because of the changing dynamic technology, but I think our children who will come, we have to work in a way that they will not be totally alienated. Today, we have some of our children who do not speak the language any longer. Those are byproducts of another generation to come. I tell my own kids, I say, well, perhaps my great-grandfather wanted them were affected, and then you, if you don't speak my language, you will be the new slave for the masters, because you speak their language. You eat my bread, you sing my song. You see the complex situation we find ourselves in? And I said, the classic example is Liberia. If we, at that time, became the first independent country, advocated for the rest of Africa, and I say the dungeon, there's deeper engagement in this process. I did not know that. Otherwise, the millennials will come. Those who say, all of us here, who say, our labor strength is behind the house. Yes, you are entitled to your citizenship, but when your labor strength is buried under the cola tree, and you have not a dime to invest under the cola tree, the millionaires will come, take the cola tree, take the land, and subject you to work and determine what they pay you. Why? I think we need to take this to another level so that we can find better answers.
Presentation. My name is Matthew Fuller. I want to understand the vision or the mission of
the vision. I want you to please explain to us the vision or the mission of the Afro-Jamaican missionary as it relates to Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's always a great privilege to hear of what is happening on the other side. And I think Dr. Afi's comments about the mutual suspicion and their response, whether it's slavery, it's something that we at this conference and subsequently need to think about. And the brother's comment about not knowing some of these things, I think it's a bit more worrisome. I worry about the current generation, our young people. If the older generation of our young people, they didn't know much about, the afterlives of people who were impacted by slavery, then what's about the current generation, the future generation? So it means that we have a lot of work to do. I grew up in this country, went to high school here, but I never read or learned about what was happening in the institution of slavery and all the writings that came out of, institution of slavery, Richard Wright, Native Song, folks, black people are writing, Zero New Keystone writing, none of those things, taught here. I only learned of those things when I moved to the United States and I was exposed to all this rich, African American history, writing. So I don't know whether it's deliberate or not. I think we need to make effort to bring the knowledge of people and forget about now blaming others. And I think this is precisely what this conference is all about. At the University of Liberia, we generate knowledge. There's so much knowledge out there now, but we have no excuse. Before there were not many books. I went to high school reading Time magazine and using magazine. I read about the Cold War and the superpower rivalry between the United States and former Soviet Union. It was fascinating. But I didn't read about the source of black thought, or Richard Wright, Native Song. So we have to benefit upon the knowledge that the last century has been lost. And especially the use of technology like this conference, you don't have to be physically present, participate. So universities in Africa have got to capitalize on the century of knowledge discovered. The world has, so we bridge this gap, so we address this, mutual suspicion, so that African American students who study in the United States, can learn about what's happening in Africa without share, experiences, share knowledge. And I think that, in a way, will be a good way to start addressing the mutual suspicion. Thank you very much for your question.
So let me talk to
So we'll take one last question.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your presentation. I was hesitant to ask this question because you touched on it a little bit in your answer to someone else's question. I wondered if you could talk more about what you mean by status in the Afro-Jamaicans trying to acquire status. And because they were trying to acquire status, they converted and assimilated in certain ways. Is that only about land ownership, or are there other means of status that you're referring to? And could you talk a little bit about what you mentioned in your response to someone about a class of Afro-Jamaicans who rejected the assimilation and therefore rejected Christianity? Can you just tell us a little bit more about what you found, maybe in your story, and if there were any that actually did adopt Christianity, what are the ways in which they were able to retain some of their own heritage and tradition while still practicing Christianity. What maybe was the boundary for them to go to other religions and reject Christianity? Thank you.
So in terms of the vision of the missionary enterprise, for the Afro-Jamaican missionaries, they saw themselves as being called to serve in Africa. So when you look at the narratives, especially as they're being commissioned in Jamaica, and they're in the chapels, the churches where they worship and the community, they're sending them off to get on board the ships that will take them to Africa. You have some say, I've been called. God has called me to this work. So they see themselves as a part of the process of bringing Christianity to, you say, dark Africa. That's the type of language that you will see. So they see themselves as the ones who will embody this model of Black Christian civilized identity. They're the ones who are going to come along with the missionaries from Europe to basically save and redeem Africa. So that would be part of their mission. In terms of the second question, these words from Bob Marley came to my mind, where he says, "Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds." And so there's in talking about, worrying about the current generation, I'm reminded of a story about Maya Angelou, where she was somewhere and a young person walked up to her and called her Maya, and she said, "No, you address me as Dr. Angelou or Dr. Maya." And the comment was, young people, our children know what we teach them. And so there's the need for almost like a re-rooting of ourselves in our story and our history. It's not, our story and history does not seep into our skin by osmosis. It is something that has to be in the air, in the fabric, in the food, in the conversations that we have at the dinner table. And so it's almost like a whole reorientation of centering, taking these things as priority, taking them as significant, and being intentional about implementing it. So in regards to the whole issue of status. So Jamaica, like the rest of the Caribbean, is a class society. And so your status is linked to home ownership, it is linked to education. One of the things ways in which you see this is that when the Afro-Caribbeans immigrants went to the UK in the 1950s, they were, because they were middle class, embodying Christianity, Victorian belief system, comporting themselves in particular ways. So they knew they've gone through a very British-centric education system, so they could name the kings of England, they could talk about British geography, they could talk about British history, but they knew nothing of the Caribbean. At that time, they knew nothing of Caribbean history that came post-independence. And so they saw themselves as Black white people. They were people of African ancestry, but they were essentially British people. They carried themselves as such. And so with that, education was seen as a means of whitening you. The religious beliefs whitened you, which church you were associated with, whether you're part of the Anglican church or the Baptist church. Those things you were afforded status and position in your community. So the ones who were the leaders in the communities were the ones in these, you'd say the mainline denominations, who had certain jobs, who owned land, who were educated. And so it was, once you've gone through this process of internalization, it is hard for you to hold on to the African aspects, because part of that internalization was you get rid of the African vestiges. In terms of the lower class, African Jamaicans, they held on to it more intentionally. And so while they may have been a part of the Methodist or the Moravian or the Baptist church or later the Anglican church, they saw within those churches this acquiescing to status quo as being reprehensible. And so throughout Jamaican history, you will have different movements where they're protesting against their rights not being taken into consideration. So you'll have different rebellions even post-emancipation. And so because there is this strong heritage of the Maroonage, so the Maroons are a part of the heritage. Marcus Garvey and Pan-Africanism is a part of the heritage. Bob Marley and Rastafarianism, which is a very Afrocentric religion. So you have this almost this milieu being created within the country where there are alternatives in terms of religious beliefs and practices. You also have Christians who hold divergent views together. So in Jamaica, there's an Afro-Jamaican religion called revivalism. And so you will have some on Sundays, they're at the Anglican church or the Methodist church or the United Church, which is the Presbyterians. And on Mondays, they're wrapping the head, the ladies are wrapping the head in white cloth, and they're going to the Revivalist Zion Church. And so they're holding these two, in some regards, different religious views together as just a part of life. There's no dissonance between the two. They're seeing it as one and the same. And so I think when we're looking at religious beliefs and practices, is to recognize that it's probably a lot more fluid than we make it to be. There, oftentimes people are making this rigid demarcation between Christianity as a traditional African beliefs. It's much more permeable within daily life. And for those who are in the church, it's a hard thing to acknowledge because that permeability doesn't really fit the dichotomy of you make a break and you become a Christian. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation, wonderful discussion, and at this point I'll hand over to Professor Rogers.
All right, so first I want you to join me in appreciating first the moderator. At the same time, join me in appreciating the keynote speaker. I know we're really getting hungry now, but I think we've been fed on two levels. One, the food for thought that we are being presented with, I think helps us to get hungry for the other food that is awaiting us. And I wanted to just underscore the importance of the transatlantic impact or dimension. So I'm just going to end with 3 footnotes. The first footnote, why we are here because in thinking about the afterlives of slavery, the impact is global. The impact is not simply in America. The impact is not simply in Europe. The impact is also in Africa. And we can see many manifestations of that. And it continues till today. To be quite candid, the Liberian Civil War is a significant fallout from the afterlives of slavery. So the point we're trying to make here is that if we want to unpack the afterlives of slavery, we need to look on a global landscape and see, of course, the experience of colonization is a common current, but how that is experienced in different contexts might differ. But each of these is important in its own right. And we just need to open our eyes. But the point I'm trying to also make here is that the history of Africa is incomplete without the history of the African diaspora, wherever it is, whether in the US and elsewhere. At the same time, the history of the African diaspora is incomplete without understanding the history of Africa. And I think the African Union was not insensitive by declaring the African diaspora as the sixth region of Africa. And I think this helps us to begin to see the connection between Africa and its diasporas wherever they find themselves. And just to end on this point, the dehumanization process, but also exploitation and expropriation by the West has not stopped. The US economy, the European economies cannot be understood without thinking about the sweat and the blood of humans. And I think this is very important in this conversation. So that's my first footnote. The second footnote, which is very important and which this keynote brought, is to, again, to unpack the missionization processes that we encountered in Africa. History books, religious studies books tell us that Europeans came to evangelize and brought light to the continent. That is one-sided story. Africans, African Americans, Afro-Jamaicans, and Christians from the West Indies were part of this enterprise. Some of you might be shocked to know that it was not Scottish missionaries, the Presbyterians, who brought Christianity to Ghana and Nigeria. It was Afro-Jamaicans who first introduced, Christianity to parts of Nigeria and to Ghana as well. So that part of the story that has not been told needs to be told. Who is to do the telling? It is you and I. So we have to get our fingers dirty just to help us complicate and tell this bigger story that has been largely left out. The last point I wanted to, I'm seeing red eyes now, so I better stop. The last point, in unpacking these complexities and the problems that the afterlives continue to create, dehumanization, disempowerment that is being experienced both on the continents, but also in the African diaspora, be it the US, be it Brazil, be it Jamaica. One point that we must bear in our minds is that it's one thing to tell these stories. It's one thing to begin to unpack these new narratives that have never been, brought to the limelight. Let us not be stopped there. Let us move beyond just telling these stories. Let us move ahead to think, how do we, as Africans, as African Americans, and as Afro-Jamaicans and Afro-Brazilians, what can we do? How can we contribute to improving our livelihood? What can we do to make things better, rather than being stuck in just thinking about the problems that we face? How do we contribute to improving this whole situation that we find ourselves? So I think this is food for thought for all of us. And I hope that as we go for lunch, we think about this and also for the rest of the conference here. And I think it brings about the South-South dynamics that we often don't think about. And I'm so happy that we are having this conversation. So now it is time for the other food. You might eat it without thinking, but I will encourage you, as we have lunch, let it be another food for thought about all the questions that we are having here. So after lunch, we announced that there will be a visit to historical sites. We have very limited spaces in the vehicles that will be provided. But we will, while you are eating, we will tell you the capacity that we can entertain. And please, priority is for international visitors and guests who are here with us. So on this note, I would like to declare this session closed, and then to open up the next session, which is the real food for thought. So please, enjoy your lunch, and you'll hear more information about historical history. Yes.
Oh, I see. She's hiding there. Why?
So when you come, she's stuck. Yes.
Yes, what happened to that? I didn't see it there.
Right here.
Oh, my God. I'm okay. I just looked into the crowd. I think you had a letter from her somewhere. Oh, she's learning some skills.
He's so patient, still you with me on my level. Yes. Finish this.
Oh, my goodness. What
And Federación
So you guys are going to go to the island, Reverend Island. You're going for the rest of the day, right?
You're not downstairs? You're not downstairs?
We'll be here tomorrow.
Sure.
I'm just so happy I get to see you every day for at least 3 days.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
See you.
Oh, no, we went to, he went to the hospital.
Okay. Yeah, I saw my graduate school here there.
So they